January 26, 1945. Eastern France. Snow on the ground, smoke in the sky, chaos in every direction. A tank burns at the edge of a forest. The metal groans, the flames crackle. And on top of it, standing, not hiding, is a young soldier with a baby face and a .50 caliber machine gun. He's alone, surrounded. The rest of his unit has fallen back, but Audie Murphy doesn't move. The Germans are coming, dozens of them, armored and armed, and still he fires, controlled, calm, unshaken. Smoke rises around him. Blood streaks his face, but his grip stays firm. This wasn't courage, this was a promise. No one would take this position, not while he breathed. Minutes feel like hours. Bullets whiz by, shells explode. But Murphy holds his ground, mowing down enemy after enemy. A 19-year-old boy fighting like a man possessed. And when it's finally over, he's still standing. A legend is born. But before this moment, before the fire and the fury, there was a different Audie. A boy from Texas, shaped not by war, but by poverty, loss, and a hunger no battle could match. Before medals, before war, before the fire, there was dust. Dry Texas fields under a relentless sun, and a boy with no shoes, no future, and barely enough to eat. Audie Leon Murphy was born in 1925, the sixth of 12 children. His father drank, his mother prayed. But prayer couldn't keep the family together, and hunger didn't wait for miracles. When Audie was just 16, his father walked out and never came back. Not long after, his mother died. That day, something inside the boy broke, and something else hardened. He dropped out of school to find work, determined to keep his younger siblings from being scattered into orphanages. He picked cotton, cleaned floors, did anything for $1. His hands were calloused, his face always serious. There was no space for childhood. At night, when the world quieted, he would practice shooting with an old rifle, using tree bark as targets, not for sport, for survival. Hunting rabbits meant food, missing a shot meant hunger, and little by little he became frighteningly precise, calm, steady, silent. Neighbors noticed. "That Murphy boy's got steel in him," they'd whisper. But no one knew how much. He was small, barely 5'5". He didn't smile much. He didn't complain either. What he carried inside wasn't visible, but it was real. The weight of a family, the ache of poverty, and a growing fire to prove he was more than just another forgotten farm kid. He had no money, no connections, no prospects. But Audie had grit, and when war broke out, he saw a chance, not to escape but to fight, for dignity, for purpose, for something that might finally matter. The battlefield hadn't met him yet, but it was waiting, and so was history. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, the world caught fire. Boys across America rushed to enlist. They wanted revenge, glory, a uniform. Audie Murphy wanted all of it, but most of all he wanted purpose. He was 16, too young, too small, too pale. The recruiters looked him up and down and shook their heads. "You're not ready, son." He tried the Marines, rejected. The Navy, denied. He even tried Canada. Nothing. But rejection only fueled him more. He started eating peanut butter by the spoonful, doing push-ups in the dark. He lied about his age, faked documents. Eventually, in 1942, the army relented. He was in. Barely training was another battle. He passed out during long marches. Others mocked him. "Farm boy won't last," they said. But he kept going, kept pushing. No matter how much it hurt, he showed up. First at formation. Last, to leave the range. Quiet, relentless, focused. There was something in his eyes the others didn't have. Not rage, not pride, but a deeper kind of hunger. He wasn't trying to prove anything to them. He was trying to outrun the shadows behind him. Poverty, loss, loneliness. By the end of training, no one laughed. They didn't call him Kid anymore. They called him Murphy. He earned that. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest. But when the unit shipped out overseas, no one questioned whether he belonged. He'd carved his place with grit and silence, and now, finally, he was going to war. He didn't know what awaited him on the beaches of Sicily, or the hills of Italy, or the freezing forests of France, but he was ready to meet it. When Audie Murphy set foot on foreign soil, the war was already roaring. His first deployment was in North Africa, then Sicily, hot, unforgiving terrain where bullets flew like insects. At first, he felt overwhelmed. Explosions deafened him. Orders blurred. Blood was everywhere. But something strange happened. He didn't freeze. He didn't flinch. He moved fast, smart, focused. In his first real firefight, he killed 2 enemy soldiers. It was him or them. No time to think, just act. And when it was over, he didn't brag, didn't speak. He just cleaned his weapon and waited for the next mission. His superiors took notice. "That kid's got nerves of steel," one sergeant said. But it wasn't nerves. It was instinct, forged in childhood, sharpened by survival. While others hesitated, Audie advanced. While others panicked, he calculated. In Italy, he led patrols through mud and minefields. He rescued wounded men under fire. He captured enemy positions with half the resources. His face stayed calm, but inside the silence grew. He didn't laugh anymore. He didn't write home often. But his kill count rose. His medals multiplied. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross. By the time his unit moved into France, his name was whispered with reverence and a bit of fear, because there was something unsettling about Audie Murphy. He wasn't bloodthirsty. He didn't enjoy killing, but when the fight came, he never stepped back. He was surgical, precise, unstoppable. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to keep his men alive, trying to make it home. But with each mission, home felt further away. He was no longer just a boy who joined the army. He was something else now, something the battlefield had created. By the fall of 1944, the war was grinding through France like a steel monster, and Audie Murphy was at the tip of the blade. His unit moved from village to village, hill to hill, facing ambushes, machine gun nests and minefields. Sleep came in moments, meals in silence, and death without warning. Audie wasn't just surviving, he was excelling. He led charges that overwhelmed enemy positions. He pulled wounded men out of craters while bullets flew overhead. He manned machine guns and mortars, called in artillery, and when necessary, went forward alone. His reputation grew in whispers. "Murphy's out front again," they'd say, half in awe, half in disbelief. He was everywhere, on foot in trenches behind enemy lines. The medals kept coming, but Audie never talked about them. He pinned them quietly, wore them like scars. His commanders saw a leader. His men saw something more, a ghost, a symbol, a small man with calm eyes who stood where no one else would. He was brave, yes, but also dangerous, because he didn't hesitate, but the silence was catching up to him. At night, the faces of the dead returned. He couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. The gunfire echoed in his mind, even in moments of peace. He smoked more, spoke less. He had become the perfect soldier, efficient, reliable, fearless. But perfect soldiers don't last long. He didn't care about glory. He only wanted the war to end, to bring his men home, to go back to a life that already felt unreachable. And yet something inside him knew the worst was still coming, a test unlike any he'd faced, one final stand that would etch his name into history, not with medals or speeches, but with fire. But he was ready to meet it. January 26, 1945. Near the French village of Holtzwihr, the sky hung low and grey, heavy with snow and silence. Audie Murphy and his unit were posted at the edge of a forest, cold, exhausted, and under threat. Intelligence had warned of an approaching German assault, but no one expected it to come like a hammer. Tanks rolled first. Their engines roared through the trees. Then came waves of infantry, shouting in German, rifles raised. The enemy outnumbered Murphy's company 5-1. His officers gave the order, "Fall back, regroup." But Murphy didn't fall back. He stayed behind with a radio, directing artillery strikes. Shells began to rain down. Trees split. The ground shook. But the Germans kept coming. And then, a nightmare. One of the American tank destroyers was hit, catching fire. Its .50 caliber machine gun still mounted, still functional. Most men would have run. Audie climbed onto the burning tank, with flames beneath him and bullets hissing all around. He took control of the gun and opened fire. Enemy soldiers dropped. Then more came, and still he fired. Alone, exposed. He was a silhouette of defiance, perched on steel and fire, mowing down enemies like a man possessed. He called artillery closer. Too close. The operators warned him. He didn't care. "Bring it in," he shouted. "I'm right here with them." For nearly an hour he held the line. Alone, wounded in the leg, half deaf from the blasts, covered in blood and smoke. When the enemy finally retreated, his unit returned, stunned. The battlefield was littered with enemy dead. Audie jumped down from the tank, limped back, refused evacuation. Later they'd try to count the number of enemies he killed. They'd estimate over 50, but numbers couldn't measure what he did. In that frozen forest, Audie Murphy didn't just stop an army, he became something more than a soldier. He became a symbol of courage, of fury, of unstoppable will. And the war wasn't done with him yet. When the war finally ended, Audie Murphy returned home not as a soldier, but as a national icon. His actions in Holtzwihr had earned him the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in the United States. But that wasn't all. He became the most decorated American soldier of World War II, with 33 medals to his name. The press swarmed him. Newspapers called him the boy hero. Movie studios wanted him on screen. Politicians praised his courage. But inside, Audie felt none of it. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired, empty, worn down from years of killing, screaming, and survival. He didn't want parades. He didn't want applause. What he wanted, and didn't get, was peace. He tried to smile for the cameras. He gave interviews. He stood at ceremonies. But his eyes told the truth. They were distant, haunted. While the country celebrated him, Audie was still on the battlefield. The noise hadn't stopped. The images hadn't faded. At night, he had nightmares, violent ones. He woke up soaked in sweat, reaching for a pistol under his pillow. During the day, he kept people at a distance. He couldn't talk about it, couldn't explain it, and no one really asked. To the world, he was a symbol. Of victory. To himself, he was a survivor, and survival came with shadows. Hollywood embraced Audie Murphy like a golden prize. He had the face, the story, the medals, everything a producer could want. He acted in dozens of films, mostly westerns, where the heroes looked a lot like him, quiet, strong, dangerous when pushed. Dangerous. In 1955, he starred in To Hell and Back, a film based on his own life. He played himself. The country watched in awe. But while the audience saw a hero reliving his glory, Audie was reliving his pain. Every scene took him back. Every explosion echoed too close. He smiled on camera, but he wasn't fine. He suffered from what we now call PTSD, long before it had a name. He couldn't sleep, slept with a gun under his pillow, avoided crowds, started taking sleeping pills to fight the nightmares. Some days he wouldn't leave his room at all. No one wanted to talk about it. Heroes weren't supposed to break, but Audie was breaking, quietly, constantly, behind the fame, behind the films, behind the medals. The war still lived inside him, and it never let go. Audie Murphy died in a plane crash on May 28, 1971. He was just 45 years old. No cameras, no grand farewell. Just silence and the quiet grief of those who knew what he had carried. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Today, his grave is one of the most visited, not because he asked for it, but because people still feel what he gave. Audie never stopped fighting. After the war, he became a voice for veterans battling PTSD. He spoke out when no one else would. He stood up for the broken, the forgotten. He didn't write history with speeches or politics. He wrote it with action, with sacrifice, with silence. He once said, "You don't win a war by dying for your country. You win it by making the other poor guy die for his." But the real victory was his humanity. He was more than a war hero. He was a man who fought on every battlefield, including the ones no one saw. If Audie Murphy's story moved you, let his legacy live on. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of his journey resonated with you most. Like this video if you believe his courage should never be forgotten, and don't forget to subscribe to American Overcoming Stories for more powerful true stories of real war heroes who refuse to give up no matter the cost.